Greetings again. Well, still in Genesis and chapter 14 again, but man, what a story. Join me in taking a look at old Melchizedek. Oh, you read a lot about him. People have ideas and notions about him, but let's take a look together. This is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. We want to pick that up in Genesis 14 in verses 17 to 24. Let me just get it before us. After Abram returned from defeating Chedorlaomer, and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom, came out to meet him in the Valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abraham, saying, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Then Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. The king of Sodom said to Abraham, "Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself." But Abraham said to the king of Sodom, "I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and have taken an oath that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or a thong of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abraham rich.' I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the share that belongs to the men who went with me to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share." Wow, what a story. Let's unpack it for a little bit. What we want to do is talk about this old Melchizedek. In the Hebrew, the phrase is Malki Tzedek, and it means king of righteousness. So we want to think about the place, naturally. He's the king of Salem. But we want to think about the person, old Malki Tzedek. And then, of course, there must be a lesson here, because this isn't just a history book. The history in the Bible is accurate, but the Bible is not just a book of history. It is a book of revelation. It is God's word to us. So what does it say? The story is that after a long run in a hard-fought battle with the 318 young men who were trained and born in his household, so to speak. You know, these are the young guys. These aren't the kids and the women and imagine how big a tribe Abraham had traveling with him. When they set up their tents, it was a city, and there were lots of people as well as lots of animals. And naturally, it would take lots of food, so lots of animals, and people to care for the animals and all of the stuff that goes with it. So Lot had been taken captive by some marauders, and Abraham had mustered 318 men and went after them, conquered them, and brought the loot and women back. So the story is that he pursued the marauders all the way up past Dan and past Hobah, which is north of Damascus, about 30 miles. So I draw a line on the map, and Abraham was living down just north of Beersheba, somewhere around Hebron, or between Ai and Bethel, actually, is where his tent is, and the great trees of Mamre. And he is enjoying peace and the blessing of God, and is completely undeterred and uninterrupted by all the mess going on between all of these kings and the tribute and the lack of tribute and the rebellion and all that stuff. But for the sake of Lot, he goes to rescue him. So returning now with the loot and with Lot, the women, the children, all of that stuff, they apparently came down through a place called Dan, and we say the tribe of Dan, but Dan in Hebrew. And the tribe of Dan had two parcels. The first parcel allotment they were given apparently had snakes in it, so some of the people had complained and asked if they couldn't take a parcel of land way up north. So they had gone way up north to the toe of Mount Hermon, and they had gotten a piece of land up there. And there was a city up there that at some point, probably of course after the tribal allotments, but it was named Dan, the city of Dan. And today it is called Tel Dan. That is a mound that is being and has been excavated to a certain extent. And there is in that mound, they have discovered an archway. And that archway is a gateway, and it is called the Gate of Abraham because tradition says that Abraham and his entourage coming back from defeating these four kings of the north actually walked underneath or through this archway into the city of Dan. Interesting history, and I've been there. This archway is actually over 4,000 years old. So to stand there and think of something that old. Now, I've been in Central and South America and tromped around over the ruins of the Mayas and the Incas, and I've seen some pretty old stuff, but 4,000 years? Man, that really goes back. And the story is about Melchizedek, who is said to be king of Salem. Now, Abraham paid taxes to this man, this person, and he is said to be the king of a place called Salem. Maybe that's a translation of the Hebrew word shalom, and we would translate it peace, but it means a lot more than that. It's everything that is for your good and well-being. So, the interesting thing about Melchizedek is he has no pedigree. In Hebrew, it's very important to name a person's parents, and you would know where they come from, what lineage. But Melchizedek doesn't have a lineage. He doesn't have a father and a mother listed. And all that we know is that he was the priest of the Most High, and that he is king of Salem. Now, Salem, the little town or city of Salem, later became Jebus because it was inhabited by the Jebusites, and they built a fortress there that was said to be impregnable. And in a later time it became the city of David, and that is the root of what became known as Jerusalem. So listen to the wording, Jerusalem. Okay, that may be the derivative from which the words we get Jerusalem from. And Jerusalem is said to be the city of peace. So Salem is in that. And then later it became known as the city of David. And then Jerusalem. It's much, much larger than, it's a huge city today. Here's an artist's conception of the ancient city of Salem, over which Melchizedek was said to be the king. And it's on the toe of a hill. Matter of fact, Jerusalem is spread out all over these hills. It's the city of hills and valleys. And this particular one, on the toe of which Salem is built, is actually what we will come to know as Mount Moriah. Yeah, that's where Abraham went to sacrifice his son. Yes, that's where Jesus was crucified. It's all tied together. It's absolutely amazing how the place is significant. So we read that in this narrative in Genesis chapter 14, Abraham met two kings in what's called the Valley of Shaveh. It's the King's Valley. And the kings that he meets there are the king of Sodom and Melchizedek. And the king of Sodom makes an offer to Abraham and says, let me have all the people, in other words, the women and the children, and you keep all of the spoils. You can have the stuff. But Abraham rejected that. He said, no, I'm not even going to take a string or a shoestring from you. I'm never going to allow anybody to say that the king of Sodom made Abram rich. You see, Abram was convinced that his reward, whatever it was to be, would come from Yahweh, YHWH, the covenanting name of God, the creator of heaven and earth. And Abraham's confidence was in him and not some king or some king's stuff. Now, the interesting thing is that Melchizedek hosted Abraham with bread and wine. This is a priestly act. I always thought that bread and wine was something that came down to us from the Passover, but this predates the Passover by a long time. And here we have bread and wine. And oh, there's just an awful lot of stuff there. They found a worship center that has what looks to be a place where grapes would have been squeezed into grape juice and could be collected, and where bread could have been baked. There's an oven there, and there's a squeeze chute to prepare an animal for sacrifice. And there's a niche with a standing stone in it. It's been anointed for centuries with olive oil. And it may be the stone that Jacob used for a headstone, that he stood up and said, this will be a place of worship forever. Well, it may have been a worship center back all the way to Melchizedek, matter of fact. So Abraham's refusal to take the spoil reflects God's law that is given later in Deuteronomy chapter 20, where the engagement and what to do with the spoils and how to handle people and things and all of that stuff is spelled out very carefully. What the writer here wants us to know in Genesis is that Abraham lived by the rules that God would later give. And even though Abram didn't have these instructions about how to deal with foreign nations and victory and loot and all of that stuff, he lived by it. And one of the things is, don't hesitate to go to war against armies greater than yours. My goodness, this was one of those situations. And then it has to do with the spoils as well. So while rejecting the spoils for himself and accepting what his men had eaten and these three men named in this passage deserved, Abraham flatly refused to take any of the spoils from heathen. He wants only the blessing of the living God, not the stuff that other people have perhaps given their lives for. What we're hearing here or seeing here is Abraham's faith was such that he kept God's commands or God's law, God's decrees, out of a heart for God even before the law was codified or spelled out, as it later actually was. So the law seems to have been written on Abram's heart, just as God promised to do through his prophets for you and me and for those after the day of Pentecost in the New Testament. So what we understand is that Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him. It was accounted as righteousness. Now listen, folks, believing God is still the key to righteousness, to salvation. Now it isn't just a matter of believing that God lived, it's believing him to trust and obey him. That's the kind of belief that the Bible is talking about, and that's the kind of belief that Abraham evidenced and witnesses. But what about this old guy, Melchizedek? Who in the world is Malki Tzedek? Well, he's the king of righteousness. Sure, then the narrative tells us that. But that doesn't tell us where he comes from or who he is. Yes, he's the king of Salem. That means the king of peace. Now, those words are big words. Those are big titles for somebody back there. And as you read commentaries and read the opinion of others, my goodness, opinions abound, but they are so different about who this guy was. So my style is to let Scripture clarify and explain. And I want you to come with me and let's just listen to what the Scriptures say about who Malki Tzedek is. We learn a lot about him from the following passages. There's a hymn in the Hebrew psalm book, songbook. It's called the Psalms, and in in Psalm 110, and specifically verse 4. Now I'm going to isolate that because it's kind of different than everything else. And then somebody writes the book of Hebrews. I think it was the Apostle Paul, but somebody that knew Old Testament history and knew the Bible and understood it very well. And so in Hebrews chapter 5, in the first 10 verses, we get a glimpse of who Malki Tzedek is. And then later in Hebrews chapter 7, and there are 28 verses there that talk very specifically about this. These are absolutely fascinating. So this Malki Tzedek, or king of righteousness, listen to what the psalmist writes about him. Oh, the psalmist about him? Well, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Now wait a minute. You. Who's the you? It's not the Lord. The Lord has sworn, made his mind. You. That's not King David. I'm not the high priest. That's not me. That's not you. Who is the psalmist talking about when he talks about you are a priest forever? Not just for a lifetime, not just for a career, forever. In the order of Melchizedek. And then in Hebrews chapter 5, we pick it up at verse 5. So, Christ. Now here we are clearly identifying it with Jesus the Messiah. So Christ also did not take upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And he says in another place, now watch this, this is another place, this is Psalm 110:4. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So the writer to the Hebrews reaches back and quotes the 4th verse of Psalm 110 specifically. So I'm going to tell you the you there is Jesus Christ, who is a priest forever. I'm going to go on now with the Hebrews 5 passage. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, and you could say mature, but there's a measure of perfection in here, he became the source of eternal salvation, who all who obey him and who was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Now let's go to Hebrews chapter 7. And we pick it up there. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. That's where it picks up here in Genesis chapter 14 that we were looking at. 2nd verse. And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also king of Salem means king of peace. Without fear, without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Now, the law requires the descendants of Levi who become priests to collect a tenth from the people. That is, from their fellow Israelites, even though they also are descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him, who had promises. And without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. That's a principle that we need to remember there. The lesser is blessed by the greater. In the one case, the tenth is collected by people who die. But in the case of Melchizedek, by him who is declared to be living forever. Verse 9. One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in his loins, the King James would say, or in the body of his ancestor. Now, the section from 11 to 28 in Hebrews 7. If perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the law was given to the people, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron? For when there is a change of the priesthood, there must also be a change of the law. Wow! He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. For it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe, Moses says nothing about priests. And what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, one who has become a priest not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life. For it is declared, you are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless. For the law made nothing perfect, and a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Others became priests without an oath, but he, now this is Jesus, or Melchizedek, became a priest with an oath. When God said, now we're going to go back and quote Psalm 110, verse 4 again. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Because of this oath, the writer to Hebrews in chapter 7 goes on to say, Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. Now, there have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he is a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. And I want you to see that it is identified as Jesus, who is the priest in the order of Melchizedek. Because Jesus lives forever, he is a permanent priesthood. Going on in chapter 7, such a high priest meets our need, one who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priest men who are weak. But the oath, which came after the law, appointed the Son who has been made perfect forever. Wow. You know, that's pretty clear. Melchizedek is Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah, in a pre-incarnate state. This is before he was born in Bethlehem. This is before he took on human form, flesh of bones and blood like our own. We might call it an apparition, but whatever it was very real. I mean, he could handle bread and wine, and he could host Abraham, and they could talk together. They could sit and eat together. There was something very real, but different. And Jesus is not in the flesh yet, okay, incarnate, as he was when he was born in Bethlehem. And the principle is very clear. The greater blessed the lesser. That is, Melchizedek blessed Abraham. And the lesser paid tithes to the greater. That is, Abraham tithed to Melchizedek. We can't miss all the principles here. Everything says Melchizedek is Jesus Christ. the King of righteousness, the King of peace, and Abraham. Oh, do you remember that Jesus said before Abraham, I am? Wow. Hey, that's great stuff, isn't it? It'll send chills up and down your spine. Now, some people ask, oh, where did I get on more of this stuff? Well, I've got some meditations that happen 3 times a week on WordPress, Meditating with Ron, or you can pick the same thing up on a Facebook page called Meditating with Ron. Look up Dr. Ronald Hunter. And then I have some books that kind of poke at all this kind of stuff and other things. You can either get them on Amazon or you can order them from me if you'd like. My email address is Dr. Ron Hunter, and the doctor is Dr. Everything run together in small letters, DrRonHunter @gmail.com. And you just email me, I'll send you a book. One of the books has to do with God moments in short-term missions. And don't start reading it late at night. It'll cut you out of some sleep. And the other is, I call it Delightful Insights, and they're the kind of insights that I'm doing here. I probably ought to write another book. But you know, people aren't reading a lot of books today. And the other thing is, it's really expensive to print pictures. And I'm using diagrams and pictures and all kinds of stuff in what I want to share with you. And so it's just really hard to get that in print. And so I think I'm just going to keep putting them on YouTube and things like WordPress and whatever, and make them available. And people are translating these into other languages around the world. So I'm having an awful lot of fun just sharing as fast as I can keep learning. And my goodness, I'm having fun learning these days. Thanks for joining me today, and God bless you. May we enjoy the peace of God as only He can give it.